My best friend told me to divorce my husband because he's too ugly for me while she was literally wearing his cologne. Melissa sat in my kitchen wearing my husband's Tom Ford cologne and told me I deserved better than someone who looked like him. "You're beautiful, successful, could have anyone," she said, gesturing with my coffee mug. "Why settle for someone who looks like they got hit with a brick?" The cologne was unmistakable. Tobacco Vanille, $350 a bottle. I bought it for James last Christmas. He wore it exactly twice, once on New Year's Eve and once to his company dinner in March. But here was Melissa, my best friend of 15 years, absolutely drenched in it on a random Thursday morning in May. I didn't say anything about the cologne, just smiled and changed the subject to her new job at the bank. She kept pushing, though, pulled up Instagram profiles of random men. "Look at this guy from my gym. Investment banker, 6'3", actual jawline." Then she started listing James's supposed flaws. His crooked nose from boxing, the scar above his eyebrow, his ears that stuck out slightly, how he was only 5'9". "You could do so much better, Layla. I hate seeing you waste your youth on him." What Melissa didn't know was that James and I had been trying for a baby for 3 years. IVF failed 4 times. We'd spent $80,000. Our marriage was rock solid, built on actual love, not whatever shallow garbage she was spewing. James might not be conventionally attractive, but he held my hand through every injection, every negative test, every loss. He made me laugh when I wanted to die. He learned to cook 40 different meals when depression killed my appetite. He never once complained about the cost or suggested we give up. That same night, James came home without his wedding ring, said it was getting resized. His gym bag had a receipt from Walgreens for cologne, the same cologne Melissa was wearing. I knew then, but didn't confront either of them. Instead, I started planning. See, Melissa always wanted what she couldn't have. In high school, she pursued my prom date after I mentioned I liked him. In college, she applied to my internship after I got accepted. When I got engaged, she suddenly started dating frantically, desperate to beat me to the altar. Her whole identity revolved around one-upping me. So I gave her something to really want. Started posting about how amazing James was. Not fake posts, real ones. Pictures of the surprise trip to Napa he'd booked for my birthday. The Cartier bracelet he bought when I got promoted to regional director. The handwritten letters he left on my pillow every Friday. Things that were always true, but I'd kept private before. Melissa started texting immediately. "Must be nice. Some people get all the luck." He never did that before. That last text was interesting. Before what? Within a week, she was openly bitter. Complained that her boyfriend Kyle never did romantic gestures. Started asking specific questions about James's schedule, his preferences, his favorite restaurants. I answered everything honestly, knowing she was taking notes. 2 weeks later, James confessed. Broke down crying in our bedroom. Said Melissa had been pursuing him for months. Started with innocent texts about planning my surprise birthday party. Escalated to showing up at his gym, his office, the coffee shop he went to every morning. She'd told him I was cheating with my coworker Robert. Said she had proof but would only show him in person. When they met, she tried to kiss him. He pushed her away, but she'd already doused herself in his cologne from his gym bag. "I'm so sorry," he sobbed. "I should have told you immediately. I was scared you'd believe her over me." I held him while he cried. Told him I already knew. That's when we planned the vow renewal. Not a real one, just a performance. We announced it at my company party, where Melissa was my +1. 10 years deserves celebration, I announced to 50 colleagues, especially after everything we've overcome. I made sure to mention the date, the venue, the designer dress, the $20,000 budget. Melissa's face went through 6 different emotions. The next 3 weeks were beautiful. She texted constantly, fishing for details. What time? Who's invited? What was James wearing? Where were we honeymooning? I gave her crumbs, enough to keep her hooked but never enough to satisfy. The day before the fake renewal, she broke. Called me crying. "I need to tell you something about James." "Oh," I said, examining my manicure. He tried to kiss me 2 months ago. "I didn't want to hurt you, but you're about to renew vows with a cheater." I laughed, actually laughed. "Melissa, I know about everything. The texts, the gym stalking, the cologne you stole from his bag. James told me everything." Silence. Requested Reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. The phone stayed quiet for so long I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then Melissa's voice came back shaky and wet. She asked how long I'd known, why I'd set up the whole fake vow renewal thing if I already knew everything. I told her James confessed 2 weeks ago. I needed to see exactly how far she'd go with her lies about him cheating on me. She started sobbing harder, asking if the renewal was ever real, or if I'd made the whole thing up just to mess with her. I said it was completely fake, that we never planned any actual ceremony. The venue didn't exist, and the dress I'd described was from a magazine. Every detail I'd fed her over those 3 weeks was designed to make her show her real intentions. She kept crying and asking why I couldn't just talk to her like an adult instead of playing games. I almost laughed at that, considering she'd spent months stalking my husband and lying about me cheating. Her voice changed then, got defensive and sharp. She claimed she was trying to protect me from a man who wasn't good enough for me. Said her whole pursuit of James was just testing his loyalty to see if he'd actually cheat. She insisted she never really wanted him, that she was doing me a favor by checking if he'd stay faithful. I did laugh then because the desperation in her voice made it obvious she actually wanted him and couldn't handle getting rejected. She started talking faster, saying James had been flirting with her first, that he'd encouraged her attention by being too friendly at my birthday party. I cut her off and said James told me everything about her showing up at his gym, his office, his morning coffee shop. She went quiet again for maybe 10 seconds. Then she tried a different angle, claiming I'd always been competitive with her and was twisting the situation to make her look bad. She brought up high school and college, saying I'd always acted like I was better than her. I told her our friendship was done and hung up before she could say anything else. My hands shook a little as I blocked her number in my contacts. Then I went through Instagram, Twitter, every social media platform we shared, and blocked her on all of them. The whole process took maybe 5 minutes and felt surprisingly good, like cleaning out a closet full of clothes I'd never wear again. James came home about an hour later carrying Thai food from our favorite place. He took one look at my face and asked if I'd talked to Melissa. I nodded and told him everything while we ate pad Thai straight from the containers on our couch. He listened without interrupting, his jaw getting tighter when I described her trying to flip the story. We ended up watching 3 episodes of some terrible reality show about people buying houses they couldn't afford. James kept his arm around me the whole time and didn't mention Melissa once. The next morning, I woke up to 6 texts from Presley asking if I was okay. She said Melissa had called her last night crying about some misunderstanding between us. Presley wanted to know what happened because Melissa was being weird and wouldn't give details. I sat up in bed and scrolled back through my phone to find the screenshots James had sent me of his confession text. Then I added screenshots of the messages Melissa had sent him over the past months. The ones where she asked about his schedule, suggested meeting up, made comments about his cologne. I sent the whole collection to Presley with a message saying, this was what actually happened. She responded within 2 minutes with 4 shocked face emojis and a long text apologizing for even questioning me. She said Melissa had been fishing for information about my relationship for months now. Asked weird specific questions about whether James and I seemed happy together, if we ever fought, what his work schedule was like. Presley said she'd thought it was just normal friend curiosity, but now it seemed creepy and calculated. She asked if I needed anything or wanted to get coffee and talk. I thanked her but said I just needed some space to process losing a 15-year friendship. Over the next few days, 3 more mutual friends reached out asking what happened. Each time I realized Melissa must be calling everyone we knew trying to control the story. I decided to tell the truth to anyone who asked me directly, but I wouldn't start some campaign against her. That felt too much like high school drama, and I was 32 years old with better things to do. Jasmine from work stopped by my office on Thursday afternoon. She closed the door behind her and sat in the chair across from my desk. She said she'd always thought Melissa seemed jealous of me, but never imagined it went this far. Then she told me Melissa had made bitter comments about my Cartier bracelet at the company party. Said something about how some people got expensive jewelry while others got nothing. Jasmine also remembered Melissa asking pointed questions about the Napa trip, wanting to know if James planned it himself, or if I'd had to hint about wanting to go. I thanked Jasmine for telling me and said it helped to know other people had noticed Melissa's behavior. That evening, James came home looking uncomfortable. He said Clint from his office had pulled him aside that afternoon. Clint told him he'd seen Melissa at the gym multiple times over the past few months. She'd been waiting near James's usual workout area, always dressed up nice and wearing heavy perfume. Clint thought it was weird at the time, but figured maybe she was meeting someone there. He didn't realize she was actively pursuing James until the story came out. James looked embarrassed talking about it, like he should have noticed and done something sooner. I reminded him that Melissa was good at manipulation, and he'd handled it by rejecting her and confessing to me. A week after the phone confrontation, my cell rang with Kyle's name on the screen. I didn't answer because I figured he was calling about Melissa. James's phone buzzed a minute later with a text from Kyle asking what happened. Kyle said Melissa came home crying the night I'd confronted her and wouldn't explain why I suddenly wasn't talking to her. James looked at me and asked if he should call Kyle back. I nodded and said Kyle deserved to know his girlfriend had been pursuing another man for months. James called him and put the phone on speaker. He explained everything from the beginning, how Melissa had started with innocent texts about planning my birthday, then escalated to showing up places James went regularly. Kyle stayed quiet through the whole explanation. Then he asked if James had any proof. James sent him screenshots of Melissa's messages, including the ones where she'd tried to convince him I was cheating. Kyle thanked him for being honest and hung up. That same night around 11, my phone started ringing from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call from a different number. Then another. I listened to the first voicemail and heard Melissa begging me to call her back. She said Kyle had broken up with her, and she needed me to tell him it was all a misunderstanding. The other voicemails were similar, her voice getting more panicked each time. She called from 6 different numbers over the next 2 hours. I didn't respond to any of them. James and I sat on the couch watching her destroy herself through increasingly desperate voicemails. By the 10th call, she was screaming that I'd ruined her life over nothing, that I was a terrible friend who never really cared about her. I deleted each voicemail without listening all the way through. The next morning, I called my phone carrier and changed my number entirely. 2 weeks later, I walked into the coffee shop on Pine Street at 7:15 in the morning. James always stopped there before work to get his usual black coffee and blueberry muffin. I'd been avoiding the place since everything happened, but needed caffeine badly after a terrible night of sleep. The bell above the door jingled, and I saw her immediately. Melissa sat at the corner table near the window wearing a gray sweater and jeans. Her hair looked unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail. She'd positioned herself where she could see the door, and her eyes locked onto me the second I entered. My stomach dropped, but I kept walking toward the counter. She stood up and moved to intercept me before I could order. Her face looked puffy like she'd been crying recently. She opened her mouth, but I held up one hand and walked past her to place my order. The barista took my request for a large latte, and I paid without looking at Melissa, even though I could feel her hovering 3 feet behind me. She followed me to the pickup area and stood there wringing her hands. The barista called my name and handed me the cup. I turned to leave, but Melissa stepped directly into my path. Her eyes were red and watery, and she looked smaller somehow than I remembered. She started talking fast about how sorry she was, and how she'd been going through something mentally that made her not think clearly. The words tumbled out in a rush like she'd rehearsed them. She said therapy helped her realize she'd acted inappropriately, and she wanted to make things right between us. I sipped my latte and watched her without responding. She kept going about how our friendship meant everything to her, and she'd made terrible mistakes but hoped I could forgive her eventually. Other customers glanced over at us, and the barista pretended to wipe down the espresso machine while obviously listening. I set my cup on the counter and looked at Melissa directly for the first time. I told her that 15 years of friendship taught me she always wanted what other people had. In high school with my prom date, in college with my internship, now with my husband. She always needed to compete instead of just being happy for me. I said this time she went too far by trying to destroy my marriage with lies about James cheating. My voice stayed calm but firm, and I made sure to speak clearly so she couldn't misunderstand. Melissa's face crumpled and tears started running down her cheeks. She grabbed a napkin from the counter and pressed it against her eyes. When she looked up again, her mascara had smeared into dark circles. She said I was always the pretty one and the successful one, and she just wanted to feel special for once. She said watching me get everything while she struggled made her feel worthless. Her boyfriend Kyle never did romantic things, and seeing James treat me well made her realize what she was missing. She admitted she convinced herself that if she could just have what I had, then maybe she'd finally feel good enough. The confession hung in the air between us, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger anymore, but sadness. Real deep sadness about wasting 15 years on someone who saw me as competition instead of a friend. I told her I understood feeling inadequate, but that didn't excuse what she did. I said I hoped she got therapy and found happiness, but we couldn't be friends anymore. Our friendship was built on her comparing herself to me, and that wasn't healthy for either of us. Melissa reached out and grabbed my arm before I could turn away. Her fingers dug into my sleeve and she pulled me back around to face her. She said James wasn't even that great, and I was making a huge mistake choosing him over her. Her voice got louder, and other customers definitely heard. She said any woman would want a man who actually looked good instead of someone with a crooked nose and ears that stuck out. The comment showed she still didn't get it at all. Loyalty and love mattered more than whatever shallow attraction she based relationships on. I pulled my arm away from her grip and picked up my latte. I walked toward the door without saying anything else. Behind me, I heard her calling my name, but I pushed through and stepped onto the sidewalk. The morning air felt cold on my face, and I took a deep breath. Something felt lighter in my chest, like I'd been carrying weight I didn't realize was there. That friendship died a long time ago, but I'd been too loyal to admit it. James's car pulled up to the curb 30 seconds later. He'd been circling the block waiting for my text. I climbed in, and he looked at my face and asked if I was okay. I nodded and told him to drive. We headed across town to a different coffee shop on Market Street that neither of us had been to before. The following week at work, I noticed people acting weird around me. Conversations stopped when I walked into the break room. Coworkers gave me sympathetic looks in the hallway. On Wednesday afternoon, Jasmine stopped by my office and closed the door behind her. She sat down in the chair across from my desk and said she needed to tell me something. Melissa had been calling mutual friends and telling them I stole James from her. The story Melissa spread claimed she and James had been secretly dating, and I found out and seduced him away to hurt her. Jasmine said it sounded completely insane, but some people seemed to believe it, or at least weren't sure whose version to trust. I almost laughed because the lie was so ridiculous, but then realized some people might actually buy her story. Melissa was good at playing victim and crying on command. I thanked Jasmine for telling me and asked who else knew. She listed 4 names of people from our friend group. 2 of them texted me that evening asking if we could talk. I responded saying I'd explain everything but needed to do it in person with everyone together. Presley organized a dinner at her apartment for Friday night. She invited our core friend group, and I said I'd bring James, so he could explain what actually happened. 4 people showed up, which was less than I hoped but more than I feared. Presley and Jasmine already believed me. The other 2 were friends I'd known for years, but they looked uncomfortable when James and I arrived. We sat around Presley's dining table with takeout containers of Thai food. James explained the whole timeline, starting with Melissa's initial texts about planning my birthday party. He showed screenshots on his phone of her messages, including the ones where she claimed I was cheating. He described her showing up at his gym and office and the coffee shop. He explained how she tried to kiss him and he rejected her immediately, then confessed everything to me. One friend named Sarah nodded along and said it matched what she knew about Melissa's behavior patterns. The other friend named Michael stayed quiet and picked at his pad thai. After James finished talking, Michael said Melissa seemed genuinely devastated when she called him. He said her story about James leading her on sounded convincing. I pulled out my phone and showed the timeline side by side. James confessed to me 2 weeks after Melissa started pursuing him. Her stalking behavior lasted months before he told me. The screenshots proved she initiated everything and he rejected her. Michael looked at the evidence and his face changed. He apologized for doubting me and said he should have known better. Sarah squeezed my hand across the table. Michael left early saying he had work in the morning, but I could tell he felt guilty. James held my hand under the table through the rest of dinner. Presley opened wine and we talked about other things, trying to move past the awkwardness. Around 10, we said goodbye and headed home. In the car, James reminded me that people who didn't trust me after 15 years weren't really my friends anyway. 3 weeks after the confrontation with Melissa, I sat in my therapist's office on a gray Tuesday afternoon. I'd been seeing her for 2 years to deal with the fertility struggles and depression. She asked how I was processing everything with Melissa. I started talking about feeling relieved the friendship ended, but then my voice cracked. Tears came suddenly and I couldn't stop them. I cried, realizing I'd wasted 15 years on someone who saw me as competition rather than a true friend. Every memory felt tainted now. Every moment I thought we shared genuine connection was actually her measuring herself against me. My therapist handed me tissues and let me cry without interrupting. When I finally stopped, she asked what I learned from the experience. I said I learned that loyalty matters more than history. That some people can't be happy for you because they're too busy being unhappy with themselves. That I deserved friends who celebrated my success instead of resenting it. She nodded and said grief was appropriate even when losing something unhealthy. I was mourning the friendship I thought I had, not the one that actually existed. That distinction helped somehow. I left her office feeling wrung out but clearer than before. I drove home from my office feeling empty and somehow lighter at the same time. James was in the kitchen making dinner when I walked in. He looked up from chopping vegetables and his face went soft with concern. I dropped my bag on the counter and just stood there for a minute. He put down the knife and came over to me. We ended up sitting on the couch in our living room with takeout containers of Chinese food between us. I told him everything about the therapy session and how I finally cried about losing Melissa. He listened without interrupting and held my hand across the cushions. Then he started talking about how guilty he felt for not telling me right away when Melissa first approached him. His voice cracked when he said he was scared I'd believe her lies about him cheating. He explained how she made him doubt whether I'd trust him over my best friend of 15 years. I squeezed his hand and told him I understood completely. Melissa was good at making people doubt themselves. She'd done it to me countless times over the years. We talked until midnight about our marriage and the IVF struggles and how her betrayal somehow made us stronger. He admitted he felt relieved when everything came out because keeping the secret was eating him alive. I told him we needed to promise each other we'd never keep secrets like that again, no matter how uncomfortable the truth might be. He nodded and pulled me close. We fell asleep on the couch, tangled together. 3 weeks later, I was at my desk reviewing quarterly reports when Presley knocked on my office door. She came in and closed it behind her, which meant she had gossip. I saved my spreadsheet and looked up. She sat down across from me and pulled out her phone. Apparently, Melissa got fired from her bank job last week. I put down my pen and asked what happened. Presley showed me screenshots from a mutual friend. Melissa had been pursuing some guy at work aggressively despite him telling her he wasn't interested. She kept showing up at his desk and texting him outside work hours and following him to lunch. He finally reported her to HR for making him uncomfortable. The bank investigated and found multiple complaints from other colleagues about her inappropriate behavior. They let her go immediately. I stared at the screenshots, feeling this weird mix of satisfaction and sadness. The pattern was so obvious now. Melissa didn't actually want James specifically. She just wanted what she couldn't have. Any man who rejected her became an obsession. I thanked Presley for telling me, and she left to get back to work. I sat there thinking about how Melissa was destroying her own life through her choices. Part of me felt vindicated that everyone could see her behavior now. But mostly I just felt sad watching someone spiral like that. That weekend, James and I sat at our kitchen table with travel websites open on my laptop. We'd been talking about actually taking a real trip together to celebrate our marriage. Not the fake vow renewal, but something genuine to reconnect after months of stress. I clicked through photos of Italy and showed him the Amalfi Coast. He leaned over my shoulder and pointed at a hotel overlooking the water. We spent 2 hours researching and planning. Finally booked 2 weeks in Italy for October. The flights and hotels cost more than we usually spent, but it felt worth it. We needed this time away from everything. James printed out the confirmation emails and stuck them on our fridge. Every time I saw them over the next few days, I felt excited about something for the first time in months. Tuesday morning, my boss called me into her office. I walked down the hall wondering if I'd messed something up on the regional reports. She was smiling when I came in, which was a good sign. She offered me the vice president position for the Western region. The promotion meant a huge salary increase, but also relocating to San Francisco. I sat there stunned for a minute. She said I could take a week to think about it and discuss with James. I thanked her and walked back to my office in a daze. Called James from my desk and told him about the offer. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said we should talk about it properly when he got home from work. That evening, we ordered pizza and spread out a map of California on our coffee table. We talked through all the pros and cons. The career advancement was incredible for me. James could probably find work at tech companies in the Bay Area, but leaving meant starting over completely. New city, new friends, new everything. We stayed up past midnight going back and forth. Finally, around 1 in the morning, James said maybe we needed the fresh start. Staying here meant constantly running into Melissa or people who believed her lies. San Francisco offered us a clean break from all the social mess. I looked at him across the pizza box and realized he was right. We needed distance from this whole situation. I called my boss the next morning and accepted the promotion. 8 weeks after the confrontation with Melissa, I was working late at my desk finishing up projects before the move. My phone rang and I saw it was security downstairs. The guard said someone named Melissa was in the lobby asking to see me. My stomach dropped. I almost told him to send her away. But curiosity won. I said I'd come down for 10 minutes, took the elevator to the lobby and saw her sitting on one of the leather couches near the entrance. She looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed and pulled back. Dark circles under her eyes. She'd lost weight in a bad way. She stood up when she saw me and her eyes filled with tears immediately. I stayed several feet away with my arms crossed. She started talking fast, saying she was so sorry and she missed me and could we please just talk. She said she needed her best friend back. I let her finish and then told her gently but firmly that I couldn't trust her anymore. Our friendship was over permanently. She started sobbing right there in the lobby. People walking by stared at us. She begged me to give her another chance. Said she was in therapy now and working on her issues. I felt genuine pity watching her fall apart. But I also felt this huge sense of relief. Walking away from this toxic dynamic was the right choice. I told her I hoped therapy helped her, but we were done. She reached for my arm and I stepped back. Told her goodbye and turned toward the elevators. She was still crying when the doors closed. I went back upstairs knowing that was probably the last time I'd ever see her. That evening, James came home from work and found me sitting on the couch surrounded by half-packed boxes. I'd already started pulling books off the shelves and wrapping our wedding photos in newspaper. He dropped his bag by the door and sat down next to me without saying anything. We just looked at each other for a minute. Then he picked up a roll of packing tape and started sealing boxes while I labeled them with a marker. We worked together until midnight, taking apart our life in this city piece by piece. Every item we packed felt like closing a door on the Melissa situation, and everything that came with it. James found the coffee mug she'd used that morning in May when this whole thing started. He held it up and asked if I wanted to keep it. I took it from him and dropped it in the trash bag. We ordered pizza around 10 and ate it sitting on the floor between stacks of boxes. James said he was excited about San Francisco, that he'd already been looking at tech companies online. I told him I was ready to leave all this drama behind and start fresh somewhere nobody knew our history. We fell asleep that night on the couch because we'd already packed our bedding. 3 months later, we drove into San Francisco on a sunny Saturday morning with all our stuff in a moving truck behind us. The city spread out in front of us with the bay sparkling blue and the Golden Gate Bridge visible in the distance. I felt this rush of excitement looking at it all. We found our new apartment building on a steep hill with a view of the water from our living room window. James and I spent the whole first week exploring different neighborhoods and eating at random restaurants we'd never heard of. The energy here was completely different from our old city. People seemed more focused on their own lives instead of gossiping about everyone else's business. Within 2 weeks, James got hired at a tech startup in the financial district. He came home that Friday with his offer letter, and we celebrated by taking the cable car down to the wharf and eating clam chowder while watching the sea lions. I started my VP role on a Monday morning in early September. My new office was on the 14th floor with windows overlooking the bay. The team I inherited was smaller than my old one, but everyone seemed competent and professional. During my first week, I had one-on-one meetings with each person reporting to me. Nobody asked about my personal life beyond basic small talk about where I moved from. Nobody knew about Melissa or the whole mess with James. I could just be the new VP without carrying all that social baggage. The relief of that was huge. I could focus completely on work without wondering if people were whispering about me or taking sides. My boss took me to lunch that first Friday and told me she was impressed with how quickly I was getting up to speed. I thanked her and meant it because this job opportunity had given me an escape route from a toxic situation. James and I found a fertility clinic in the Marina district that specialized in difficult cases. The doctor there was a woman in her 50s who'd done research on why some people don't respond well to standard IVF protocols. She reviewed all our medical records from the past 3 years and the 4 failed attempts. Then she explained there was a different approach we could try that adjusted the medication dosages based on daily blood tests instead of a fixed schedule. She said it was more intensive and required coming in every morning for monitoring, but the success rates for people like us were better. James and I sat in her office looking at the statistics she showed us. The numbers were encouraging, but we'd been disappointed so many times before. She told us to take a few weeks to think about it and decide if we wanted to try again. We spent the next month talking through whether to do another IVF round or start looking into adoption. James researched adoption agencies and foster care programs online. He made spreadsheets comparing different options and their requirements. I appreciated that he was planning for both possibilities instead of putting all our hopes on one path. We finally decided to try the new protocol one more time because we'd always wonder if it might have worked. But we also agreed that if this round failed, we'd pursue adoption seriously, instead of continuing with more IVF. James found 3 adoption agencies in the Bay Area and requested information packets from all of them. Having that backup plan made the decision to try again feel less desperate. We weren't gambling everything on this one attempt. We were giving ourselves one more chance at biological parenthood, while acknowledging other paths to building our family. 4 months after we left our old city, Presley flew out to visit us for a long weekend. I picked her up from the airport on a Friday afternoon, and we drove back to our apartment through rush hour traffic. She loved our place and spent 20 minutes taking photos of the view from our balcony. That night over dinner at a Thai restaurant in our neighborhood, she told me what had been happening back home. Melissa had moved back to her hometown in Ohio after getting evicted from her apartment. Apparently, she'd been fired from the bank job months ago, but kept pretending she still worked there. She'd also lost most of her remaining friends after they found out she'd been pursuing another married man from her gym. Presley said the pattern just kept repeating itself until people got tired of the drama and cut her off. She'd tried to reach out to Presley several times asking about me and James, but Presley never responded. Hearing all this made me feel strange. Part of me felt sad that someone I'd known for 15 years had basically destroyed her own life. But another part of me recognized that these were consequences of Melissa's own choices. Presley and I spent Saturday walking around Fisherman's Wharf and riding the cable cars like tourists. We got coffee at this place overlooking the water and talked about everything except Melissa. She told me about her new relationship with a guy from her company and how different it felt to be with someone emotionally available. I told her about my new job and how much I loved living here. Sunday, we drove across the Golden Gate Bridge to Sausalito and had lunch at a restaurant on the water. On the drive back, Presley said she was really happy for me and James, that we seemed more relaxed and settled than we'd been in years. I realized she was right. Getting away from all that social mess had let us focus on our actual relationship instead of defending it constantly. When I dropped Presley at the airport Sunday evening, I felt grateful to have a friend who actually supported me instead of competing with me. 6 weeks after starting the new IVF protocol, I woke up on a Tuesday morning and took a pregnancy test before James got up. I'd been taking them every few days even though the clinic said to wait. This time 2 lines appeared almost immediately. I sat on the bathroom floor staring at it for a full minute before I could even process what I was seeing. Then I started crying so hard I had to put my hand over my mouth to stay quiet. James knocked on the bathroom door asking if I was okay. I opened it and just held up the test. His face went through about 5 different expressions before he started crying too. We stood there in our bathroom at 6 in the morning, hugging each other and crying. After 3 years of trying and 4 failed attempts and $80,000 spent, this was actually happening. James called his work and said he'd be late. We went to the clinic that morning for a blood test to confirm it. The results came back that afternoon showing hormone levels that indicated a healthy early pregnancy. The nurse who called with the results sounded genuinely happy for us because she'd been monitoring me every morning for weeks. My first trimester was rough in ways I hadn't expected. The nausea started around week 6 and never really stopped. I couldn't keep food down most mornings and lost 8 pounds in 2 weeks. James started working from home 2 days a week so he could help me. He'd make me ginger tea and bring me crackers in bed before I even tried to sit up. He took over all the cooking and cleaning because the smell of most foods made me sick. I felt guilty watching him do everything while I spent most evenings lying on the couch feeling terrible. But he never complained once. He'd sit next to me rubbing my back and telling me it would get better soon. His devotion during those weeks reminded me why Melissa's criticism of his appearance had been so ridiculous. She'd focused on his crooked nose and his height while completely missing that his character was genuinely beautiful. He showed up for me every single day without expecting anything in return. At 12 weeks, we went for the ultrasound that would tell us if everything was developing normally. The technician spread gel on my stomach and moved the wand around for a minute. Then she got quiet and moved it to a different spot. My heart started racing because I thought something was wrong. She turned the screen toward us and pointed at 2 distinct shapes. James grabbed my hand so hard it hurt. The technician smiled and said we were having twins. The doctor came in a few minutes later and explained that the specific protocol we'd used sometimes resulted in multiple embryos implanting. She checked both heartbeats and said everything looked healthy. James started laughing in this slightly hysterical way. He said we were getting our whole family at once after waiting so long. I couldn't stop staring at the ultrasound images showing 2 tiny shapes that would become our children. We drove home in a daze and spent the rest of the day just sitting on our couch processing the news that we were having twins. I started noticing around January that Melissa didn't cross my mind anymore during regular days. I'd be making coffee or walking to work and realize she hadn't popped into my thoughts at all. The anger had faded first, back in December when we were still unpacking boxes. Then the hurt started dissolving bit by bit, until it became this distant thing that happened to someone else. By February, I could go whole weeks without remembering she existed. The 3,000 miles between us made the emotional distance easier to handle. I couldn't accidentally run into her at the grocery store or see her car parked outside places we used to go together. She became this ghost from my old life that didn't have any power over my new one. James noticed the change before I did. He mentioned one morning that I seemed lighter, like I'd put down something heavy I'd been carrying. He was right. The friendship ending had hurt worse than I wanted to admit, even knowing how toxic it was. 15 years of history doesn't just disappear because someone betrays you. But the physical space helped me see clearly that keeping her in my life would have slowly poisoned everything good I had. My doctor mentioned a support group for women dealing with infertility issues during one of my checkups in late February. I almost didn't go because talking about feelings with strangers sounded terrible. But something made me show up to the community center on a Thursday night where 8 women sat in a circle sharing their stories. The first meeting broke something open in me that I'd been keeping sealed tight. Hearing other women describe the exact same grief and frustration and anger I'd felt during our failed attempts made me realize how alone I'd been trying to process it all. I started going every week and eventually began sharing my own story about the 4 failed rounds and the $80,000 we'd spent, and the depression that came with every negative test. Other women nodded while I talked, because they understood that specific kind of loss in a way most people couldn't. One woman had tried for 6 years, another had given up entirely after 7 rounds. Their strength helped me recognize my own. By March, I was helping newer members process their feelings, and offering the same support others had given me. Sharing what I'd been through gave it meaning beyond just my own pain. If talking about my experience helped even one woman feel less alone in her struggle, then maybe all that suffering had served some kind of purpose. James surprised me in early April with a baby moon trip to Napa Valley before I got too big to travel comfortably. We drove up on a Saturday morning and checked into this beautiful bed and breakfast surrounded by vineyards. I couldn't drink the wine, obviously, but we did tours and ate incredible food, and spent hours just talking about everything that had changed in the past 6 months. We both agreed that Melissa's betrayal, as painful as it was, had pushed us toward changes we probably needed anyway. The move to San Francisco forced us out of our comfortable routine and made us rebuild our social life from scratch. That process helped us appreciate what we had together instead of taking it for granted. James said he'd been coasting for years, going through the motions at his old job without any real passion for the work. His new position challenged him in ways that made him excited about his career again. I felt the same about my VP role. The promotion gave me opportunities I never would have had staying in our old city. We spent Sunday morning lying in bed watching the sunrise over the vineyards and acknowledging that sometimes the worst things that happen end up leading to the best outcomes. Neither of us would have chosen the Melissa situation, but we couldn't deny that our lives were genuinely better now than they'd been before everything exploded. My belly grew steadily bigger through May and June as I moved into the third trimester. We spent weekends setting up the nursery in our second bedroom, painting the walls a soft yellow that worked for both a boy and girl. James assembled 2 cribs while I organized tiny clothes by size in the dresser drawers. We'd gotten so many gifts from my work shower and his family that we had enough outfits to change the babies 3 times a day for a month. Every time I folded another onesie or arranged another stuffed animal, the reality of actually becoming parents hit me fresh. We'd wanted this for so long that part of me still couldn't believe it was actually happening. James would catch me standing in the nursery just staring at the 2 cribs and come wrap his arms around me from behind. We'd stand there together imagining what it would be like when the room was full of crying babies and dirty diapers and 3 a.m. feedings. The excitement mixed with pure terror in equal measure. Neither of us had any idea what we were doing, but at least we were going into it together as a team. The email from Melissa arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in late June, 7 months after our phone confrontation. I saw her name in my inbox and almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity won out. The message was long, several paragraphs apologizing again for everything she'd done and explaining she'd been in therapy since October working on her jealousy and competition issues. She wrote about how she'd spent her whole life comparing herself to other people and feeling like she was never enough. Her therapist helped her see that pursuing James wasn't really about him at all, but about this desperate need to prove she could have what I had. She talked about recognizing patterns from her childhood, where her older sister always got more attention and praise. The email went deep into her realization that she'd built her entire identity around one-upping me instead of figuring out who she actually was as a person. She didn't ask me to forgive her or be friends again. She just wanted me to know she was trying to change and become someone better. The tone felt genuine in a way her previous apologies hadn't. She sounded like someone who'd done real work examining her own behavior instead of just saying sorry to make herself feel better. I read the email twice, sitting at my desk with my hand on my belly feeling the baby's kick. Part of me felt vindicated that she'd acknowledged how messed up her behavior was. Another part felt sad for the years we'd wasted on a friendship built on such a broken foundation. I thought about not responding at all, but that felt cruel after she'd been so honest about her struggles. I wrote back briefly that I appreciated her letting me know about her therapy progress and wished her well in her personal growth. But I made clear that our friendship wouldn't be rekindled regardless of how much work she did on herself. Too much damage had been done and too much time had passed for us to go back to any kind of relationship. The closure felt good, though, like we were both finally moving forward on our own paths instead of staying stuck in the past. I closed my laptop and went back to work, feeling lighter than I had since her name first appeared in my inbox. Whatever healing she needed to do was her own journey now, separate from mine. My team threw me a shower at the office when I hit 36 weeks and went on maternity leave in mid-July. They decorated the conference room with balloons and streamers and piled a table high with wrapped gifts. My boss gave a speech about how valuable I'd been to the company and how excited everyone was for me to become a mom. I opened presents while eating cake and laughing at the ridiculous baby advice people kept offering. Someone bought us a book called The Baby Owner's Manual that treated infants like you were assembling furniture. Another coworker gave us a onesie that said, "I just spent 9 months inside my mom. And even I think her job is harder than yours." The gifts were generous and thoughtful, everything from practical items like bottles and burp cloths to luxuries like a fancy baby monitor and designer diaper bag. But what struck me most was how genuine the relationships felt. These people had known me less than a year, but they showed up with real enthusiasm and support. It proved I could build healthy friendships when I wasn't tolerating toxic ones. I'd spent 15 years accepting Melissa's competitive behavior as normal because that's all I knew. Now I had colleagues who celebrated my success instead of resenting it, who offered help without expecting something in return, who genuinely cared about my well-being. The contrast made me realize how low my standards had been for friendship before. James and I started a childbirth class for parents of multiples in early August. We went every Tuesday evening and sat with 5 other couples who were all having twins. The instructor taught us breathing techniques and labor positions and how to handle 2 babies at once. I watched James during every class, noticing how engaged he was compared to some other partners there. He asked questions about pain management and took detailed notes about swaddling techniques. One guy spent half the class on his phone while his wife looked ready to murder him. Another kept making jokes about how tired he was going to be, like his wife wasn't about to push two humans out of her body. Melissa's claim that I could do better seemed even more ridiculous watching these other relationships up close. Better than what exactly? Better than a man who showed up fully present and eager to learn how to take care of our children? Better than someone who held my hand during every contraction exercise and didn't complain once about the time commitment? I squeezed James's hand during a particularly intense breathing exercise and felt grateful all over again that I'd seen through Melissa's shallow criticism. His crooked nose and average height meant nothing compared to his character and devotion. The twins arrived 3 weeks later at 37 weeks, right on schedule for multiples. My water broke at 2 a.m. on a Thursday morning and we rushed to the hospital with our packed bags. Labor lasted 14 hours, which the doctor said was actually pretty fast for twins. James stayed by my side the entire time, letting me squeeze his hand until I probably left bruises. He wiped my face with cold washcloths and fed me ice chips and told me I was doing great even when I was screaming that I wanted drugs immediately. Our son was born first at 4:23 p.m., weighing 6 pounds 2 ounces. Our daughter followed 8 minutes later at 4:31 p.m., weighing 5 pounds 9 ounces. Both of them came out screaming and pink and absolutely perfect. The nurses cleaned them up and handed them to James while the doctor finished with me. I watched him hold both babies against his chest, one in each arm, with tears streaming down his face. He looked at them like they were the most precious things he'd ever seen in his life. I grabbed my phone and took a photo of that moment, capturing the pure love and joy on his face. That picture became my phone background for the next year. Every time I looked at it, I remembered why our marriage had survived everything it went through. The first month home was complete chaos in the best and worst ways possible. The babies ate every 2 hours around the clock, which meant neither James nor I slept more than 90 minutes at a stretch. We took shifts so one person could get a solid 4-hour block while the other handled both babies. Our living room turned into a disaster zone of burp cloths and bottles and dirty onesies. I leaked milk constantly despite nursing pads. James walked around like a zombie most days, functioning on pure caffeine and determination. We both cried from exhaustion multiple times. But we worked as a team, dividing responsibilities without keeping score or complaining about who was doing more. When I had a breakdown at 3 a.m. because our daughter wouldn't stop crying, James took her and walked laps around our apartment until she finally fell asleep. When he looked ready to collapse after a particularly brutal night, I told him to go sleep in our bedroom with earplugs while I handled the morning feeding. His patience during those brutal weeks reminded me exactly why our marriage survived the Melissa situation. He showed up every single day with humor and love even when we were both running on fumes. We'd built something strong enough to weather betrayal and cross-country moves, and now the absolute chaos of newborn twins. Nothing about those first weeks was easy, but I couldn't imagine going through it with anyone else. Nothing about those first weeks was easy, but I couldn't imagine going through it with anyone else. 6 weeks after the twins were born, I was changing diapers on our living room floor when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message contained 3 photos of a social media post showing Melissa in a white dress standing next to some guy I'd never seen before. The caption read something about being engaged and finding her soulmate. I looked at the pictures for maybe 10 seconds, felt a weird, detached curiosity like seeing news about someone I used to know in high school, then deleted the message and went back to wiping our daughter's bottom. James walked in carrying grocery bags and asked who texted. I told him it was Melissa's engagement announcement from a random number. He stopped putting away milk and looked at me with concern, probably expecting me to be upset or angry. I just shrugged and said I felt nothing about it, which was completely true. The woman in those photos felt like a stranger whose drama happened in a different lifetime. We took the twins for their 2-month checkup on a Tuesday morning in late September. The pediatrician measured their heads and length, checked their reflexes, and told us both babies were hitting all their milestones perfectly. Our son weighed 13 pounds now, and our daughter was 11 and a half. The doctor said their growth curves looked excellent, and their development was right on track. Driving home with both car seats secured in the back, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror at their sleeping faces. James reached over and squeezed my hand while waiting at a red light. I felt this overwhelming wave of gratitude for how everything turned out, for the healthy babies in our back seat and the husband beside me who never gave up during 3 years of trying. The fertility struggles and Melissa's betrayal and all that pain felt worth it somehow, because it led us here to this exact moment. 3 months after the twins were born, I went back to work part-time on a flexible schedule that let me work from home 3 days a week. James adjusted his hours at the tech company so he could leave early and handle afternoon feedings and naps. Our new arrangement worked surprisingly well once we figured out the rhythm. I discovered I actually enjoyed the balance between my career and being home with the babies. Working kept my brain sharp and gave me adult conversations, but I also got to be present for most of their daily routines. James turned out to be amazing at the stay-at-home parent stuff, way more patient with crying and diaper blowouts than I was. He'd send me photos during the day of the twins napping on his chest or making funny faces. Watching him embrace fatherhood so completely made me fall in love with him all over again in a different way. Presley flew up from our old city in November to meet the twins and stay for a long weekend. She showed up at our apartment with 2 massive shopping bags full of designer baby clothes that probably cost more than our monthly grocery budget. She spent an hour holding both babies and taking approximately 700 photos. Over coffee while the twins napped, she mentioned she'd seen Melissa's engagement announcement online. She said the whole thing seemed rushed and the guy looked uncomfortable in all the photos, like he wasn't totally sure about getting married. I told her honestly that I didn't care enough to discuss it further. Presley smiled and said that was probably the healthiest response possible. She talked about her own life instead, a new promotion at work, and a guy she'd been dating for a few months. Having a friend who could visit without bringing up drama or taking sides felt refreshing, and made me realize how toxic my friendship with Melissa had actually been. James and I celebrated our 11th wedding anniversary in December, with a nice dinner at an Italian restaurant downtown, while my parents drove up to babysit the twins overnight. We sat across from each other with wine and pasta and reflected on everything we'd been through together over the past year. The fertility struggles that finally ended with success. Melissa's betrayal and the painful end of that friendship. The cross-country move to San Francisco. Becoming parents to twins. All of it had made our marriage incredibly strong in ways I didn't think were possible. James told me he'd never been prouder of how I handled the Melissa situation with grace instead of getting petty or mean. I told him his support during our IVF attempts and his devotion as a father proved Melissa's criticism of him was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard. We held hands across the table and I felt certain we could handle whatever life threw at us next. Sitting in my office one afternoon in January, I realized I'd built a completely new life in San Francisco. I had genuine friends through work and our neighborhood who knew us as we are now, not as the couple dealing with fertility issues or friendship drama. My career was thriving in ways it hadn't back in our old city. We had the family we fought so hard to create. The toxic friendship with Melissa felt like it happened to a different person in a different lifetime, like watching a movie about someone else's life. I couldn't even remember why I'd stayed friends with her for so long when the pattern of competition and jealousy was so obvious looking back. When the twins were 4 months old, we flew to visit James's family for the holidays. His parents and siblings immediately fell in love with both babies, passing them around and fighting over who got to hold them next. His mom pulled me aside on Christmas Eve while everyone else was in the living room. She told me she was proud of how I handled the Melissa situation with grace and strength, that a lot of people would have made it ugly in public. She said she always knew I was the right person for James because I saw his character instead of judging him on superficial stuff. Her words made me tear up a little because I'd been worried his family might have heard Melissa's version of events. Back in San Francisco after the holidays, I was grabbing coffee near my office when I ran into someone from our old city, whose face looked familiar, but I couldn't place immediately. She recognized me first and came over to say hi. Turned out she worked with someone on my old team. We made small talk for a few minutes before she mentioned she'd heard Melissa's engagement ended badly right before Christmas. Apparently her fiancé found out about her pattern of pursuing unavailable men and called off the wedding. I felt brief sympathy for Melissa because that must have been humiliating, but mostly I felt relief that I wasn't caught up in her drama anymore. The woman seemed surprised when I said I hadn't talked to Melissa in almost a year. She clearly expected me to have all the gossip. I finished my coffee and went back to work, grateful all over again for the physical distance between my new life and that mess. James and I started planning the twins' first birthday party 6 months in advance, excited to celebrate this huge milestone after years of wondering if we'd ever become parents at all. We decided on a small gathering at our apartment with our new friend group in San Francisco, people who knew us as we are now rather than who we used to be. James wanted a dinosaur theme and I wanted something with balloons, so we compromised on dinosaurs with lots of colorful balloons. We spent evenings looking at cake designs and party decorations, laughing about how we were probably going overboard for babies who wouldn't even remember it. But after everything we'd been through to get here, we wanted to celebrate big. 9 months after moving to San Francisco, my boss called me into her office and offered me a promotion to senior vice president overseeing the entire West Coast region. The position came with a significant raise and more responsibility, managing teams in 3 states. I accepted immediately, feeling like the career advancement validated my decision to take the risk of relocating. James was incredibly supportive when I told him that night, saying he was proud of me and we'd figure out the childcare logistics together. The promotion meant our family was financially secure in ways we hadn't been during the fertility treatments. It also proved I could rebuild my career in a new city and actually thrive instead of just surviving. We interviewed 3 candidates for the nanny position and hired a woman named Carmen who had 10 years of experience with twins. She started the following Monday, coming to our apartment at 7 each morning so I could get ready for work without rushing. The cost was significant, almost $2,000 a month, but James and I agreed it was worth it to keep my career moving forward, while still having time with the babies in the evenings. Carmen was patient and warm with both twins, and within a week they were comfortable with her handling their feedings and naps. I accepted the senior vice president promotion officially and started my new responsibilities managing teams across California, Oregon, and Washington. The job required more travel than before, but I planned trips carefully around the twins' schedules and Carmen's availability. On a Tuesday morning 3 weeks later, I sat at our kitchen table drinking coffee while James played with the twins on the living room floor. He was making silly faces and they were both giggling, their little hands reaching up toward him. I watched them together and felt something shift inside me, a quiet recognition that I was actually happy in a way I hadn't been before everything happened with Melissa. The betrayal had forced me to look at my life clearly and figure out what actually mattered instead of just going through the motions. I had a husband who made our babies laugh, a career I worked hard to build, and real friends who supported us. The toxic friendship I lost had been holding me back from appreciating what I already had. The twins started sleeping through the night consistently when they were 7 months old, and suddenly James and I had evenings to ourselves again after they went down at 7. We would sit on our couch with wine and actually talk like we used to before the babies arrived. One night we were discussing our finances and realized we were in better shape than we'd been in years, even with the nanny expense. James mentioned maybe trying for another baby in a few years, and I laughed at how different our situation was now, compared to the years of failed fertility treatments. We went from struggling to have 1 child to considering a 3rd, and the irony wasn't lost on either of us. A year after the confrontation with Melissa, I moved into my new corner office with windows overlooking the bay. I put up photos of James and the twins on my desk, right where I could see them whenever I looked up from my computer. Sitting there that first morning, I felt grateful for how everything worked out in a way I hadn't expected. The friendship I lost was holding me back from recognizing the genuine love and success I already had, and walking away from that toxicity opened space for real happiness and growth that I didn't know was possible.